for joining me. I'm Susan from So Peaceful, and I like to work on projects that involve a bit of hand stitching. If you've seen any of my other applique classes, you'll know I like to use the Hugs and Kisses applique paper to get a nice turned edge on my applique. I tried needle turn once and once was enough. But most of my other projects I've included flowers, whether they've been ones that we've drawn or traced or used the pre-cut flowers. I've decided to branch out a bit though, and this time I've got a branch, but I've also got a bird, and that's a project that I'll be working on today, and then we'll be turning it into a drawstring bag. We do have kits available in our store in both the blue, yellow and in a red colour, and I'll be working on the red one today. So if you'd like to grab one of those, you'll find them available in our shop. Otherwise, just follow along and you might learn something that you can put into practice with your own bits and pieces. Stick around and I'll get started. When you open up your kit, you'll find that I've given you some shapes that I've pre-printed for you on the Hugs and Kisses applique paper. It's a good idea, particularly while it's in a big piece, just to make sure that you can tell the difference. So I've printed on the flat side or the matte side. The other side is the shiny side. The shiny side is a fusible one, and it's one that will be put onto your fabric. So the first thing that you're going to need to do then is to cut out all those shapes, and you'll just cut them out on the lines. And I like to let people know, because it's something that I only found out very recently. If you hold the scissors in your hand and you turn the paper around, you'll find that you will get much smoother curves. Now that's important to think about, because the lines that we're actually cutting with our scissors will be the lines that our fabric will fold over. So if you can get them nice and straight, we're off to a really good start. So cut out all your shapes then, and once you've done that, you'll fuse them. As I mentioned, the shiny side goes onto the wrong side of your fabric. Now it doesn't matter which kit you've got, you'll find a green piece of fabric in there, and I like to try and keep green fabrics for my branches or my leaves, so we don't get confused. So the green will go there, the branch will go on your green piece, your bird, in this case the biggest piece will be for the bulk of the bird, and there'll be a contrast piece for the bird's wing. Now that piece and this piece are similar sized, so if you wanted to swap around the purposes, there's no problem with doing that at all, as long as your pieces will fit. This one I've got the 3 petals on, which will go, or 3 little flowers that will go on the end of the branch. When you pop them on your piece of fabric, you just need to make sure that you can cut, leave 1/4 inch, so you can cut 1/4 inch all the way around them. When we cut then, what we're looking for is to keep it approximately 1/8 inch. I like to sort of, rather than people cutting too short, I generally would say between 1/8 and 1/4, but there will be times that 1/4 is really too big, and that's particularly on the sharp curves, because we're going to be folding that fabric over the paper. We need, if it's too big, it's hard to gather it around the edge of the paper. So just cut it like that. Now this piece at the end, I've cut, you've noticed I've cut the 1/8 to 1/4 inch away from the paper. This one we're not going to turn under on the outside edge of that branch, and that's because it will get tucked into the seam allowance. So if we don't put the paper underneath that, that's fine, because it will just be a little bit less bulk. Now the nice thing about the Hugs and Kisses applique paper is that it is semi-water soluble, so when I wash my bag, which inevitably will happen, it does soften up. But to make it easier to sew, we just will keep that piece flat. Other thing to keep in mind is when you're cutting your curves, the only time we're going to need to clip them is for the inward curves. If you've done any dressmaking, you'll know that clipping curves is a big part of it. But in this case, we're only clipping the inward curves, so the ones where our curves go inwards, and we'll clip. In this case, I'm just going to clip once, and I haven't gone all the way up to the paper, so we don't want to go all the way up to the paper because otherwise it might fray. So just try and keep it back a little bit. If you've got a big curve, and that one is perhaps a bigger one, I might clip twice into that one, and that just helps when I fold it over to give me a nice smooth shape on that curve. So you'll have couple of curves, inward curves only on your branch. You'll have a little one on both the bird's body and its wing. So clip those as you go, just once. Now, sometimes when I do classes, people get a bit ahead of me, and then all of a sudden they've got clips around these big parts, for example, where you've got an outward curve. If you clip into that one, when you try to fold your fabric over, you're going to end up with a lot of points on that edge, and that just makes it harder to get a smooth curve. So we try to remember just clipping the inward curves only. Now, I may have mentioned, if you buy a kit, you'll have everything in there that you need to make the project, all the fabric, paper, needles, threads. The only thing you won't find in there is a glue pen, although we do have them in our shop, the glue pens as well as refills if you haven't already got one. And I use the glue pen for getting that fabric to hold over on the paper. So just with a little bit of glue, and I only do a little bit at a time, and I have learnt on my travels, you may or may know, I actually spent most of my life in Tasmania, and it's certainly not something that is mentioned down there, but I did hear it on my travels. And that is to keep your glue pens in the fridge in hot climates. And at the moment I'm in Brisbane, where it's at least 30 degrees, and this glue pen is a little bit sticky, so it's something that I should have thought about earlier and kept it in the fridge for a little while before I tried to use it. Just going to do another snip there as well, because that is quite a big curve, and it will just help me to get around there. So when you're going around those curves, what we're aiming to do is just to gather it. A little technique, probably it's a little pinch, and I just use my my thumb to do it, to pinch and to gather it around the curves. Now, sometimes you know, it's easier to glue on the table, but because the paper is reasonably soft, you do need to be careful that you're not pushing it too hard, or you'll lose that nice curve that you went to so much trouble to cut carefully, because it will, if it gets too wet, it will push that shape in. So that's why we go gently with the glue and the gluing. And again, I'll just need to snip that a little bit further, again trying not to get all the way up to the paper, but just so that it will get into a nice curved shape. Other thing that I have found is if I hold it between my thumb and my forefinger, I can feel the edge of that paper much more easily than if I've got it sitting flat on the table. So what you're looking for are nice smooth curves then, and if you're not happy with any particular area, of course you can pick it up while the glue is still wet, or even after it's dry you can still get your fingernail underneath it and pull it out. So what you'll need to do then is to go on and cut all of those pieces out, and then we'll move on to the next step to start putting them together. Actually no, we won't. Before we do that, I want to just show you, while we're still gluing, I want to show you how to deal with the tail. And this tail, treatment of this tail, is exactly the same way that you would manage if you had leaves or you know, things that you're wanting a point on the end of. So I will do it with my petals that I've got there, although I will probably end up putting the petals underneath my branch. But the bird's tail, because it comes and sits up on top, is one area that we need to get a nice sharp point. Because the point is sharp, we can't tuck all that fabric over without it becoming square. So when we glue that one, we need to, and I'll just put a bit of glue on that side, we need to press the fabric down on one side, and then on the other side we're going to press, and I forgot to clip that one after telling you that we needed to, but we're going to press that edge over the top. And what you'll end up with, I don't know whether you can see that there, but that's a little tail. If I turn it that way, I've got a little tail that sticks out the top, and that's how you're going to get a nice sharp point. So don't cut it off, because when we stitch this onto the rest of the bird, we will then tuck that under as we stitch, and that's how we end up with a nice sharp point. So we'll continue then to trim around all our shapes. If you do have trouble getting a nice even gather, you may need to trim the edges back a slight bit. Try not to go any less than 1/8 of an inch, because if it pops out underneath, it might start to fray. There's a dog up the road having a little bark. Yeah, so I lost my train of thought. Yeah, if you're having trouble getting it round that curved edge, just trim it back a little bit. It can be because it's just too big, and that you're trying to gather it into you know, an area that it's just having trouble getting into. So yeah, preparing all your shapes then, and we'll move on. So I've got all my pieces glued then now, and little tails on my petals, and as I said, I'm still unsure as to whether I'll put them underneath or on top, so I've got some choices there, because I put the tails on them. If I wanted to leave them sharp points on top, I can do that later. The other thing that I've done is I've put the wing on the bird. Now, because we trimmed across, we had that flat, on this one we had that flat top for the bird on its tail. I just cut across level with the applique paper, and the wing goes over the top, and I've got that nice tail on the wing, because when I stitch it on, I'll be able to get a nice pointy tail. So I stuck those two together with some Roxanne's glue. If you've got Roxanne's glue, it's great for basting things together, so you don't have to put pins in them to hold them while you stitch. just a few drops of rock sands glue in the middle there, and then press it with the iron, and that will heat set it for you. If I decide I'm not happy with it, even though it's dry, it's easy enough to peel off, and to be honest, even once I've stitched it on, it is still easy enough to peel off and to move. So I'm going to stitch it around now, just on that glue. Don't put your glue up near that tail section, because if you put your glue on there, it's going to be too hard to tuck that in afterwards. So just in the middle section. So in your kits, you'll find a size 10 applique needle. This is a Hugs and Kisses applique needle, which I would use for applique. I think they're brilliant. What we're going to do is just stitch the section then that's going to sit onto the body of the bird, this little section around here. And I've given you 80 weight Wonderful thread. It's Deco Bob thread. We're going to come up from the bottom and just out through. You notice the top shape has a side, so top, bottom is underneath, but we're going to come up through the side. So if you find your needle coming up through the top, you've come too far, just come down a little bit. And I do have a knot in the bottom, because I find if I don't have a knot, the thread will pull straight through. And so I've come up through the side. I'm going to go down, back down through on the outside of my shape this time. So, but in the same area. So my stitches will be straight up and straight down. So up out through the side, and then straight back down the outside, and then I'll come forward a little bit. If you try to do stitches that are on a diagonal, you'll find that they're far more visible than a stitch that's just straight up and straight down. So try and keep them straight up, straight down, up on through the side of your top shape, and down beside it, but on the outside. Now once you've got the hang of that and you've managed to do a few stitches, what you'll find is that when you come up through the side and down the outside, you'll be able to twist your needle so that you're going straight down, and you'll be able to come up at the same time, just along a little bit further. But as long as you're keeping your, so down and then come straight up, down a little bit further, and then straight back down, but on the outside of the shape. So because the applique needle's not too long, you can actually get a nice feel for coming up, and your stitches will probably be about 1/8 of an inch apart. So just trying to keep the rhythm going, but keep in mind the stitch has to be straight on the top. So up through the side, down on the outside. Now you won't be able to see where you've been on top, because your stitches will be nice and less visible, but you will be able to see when you've gone round the area on the back, because that's where your stitches are travelling. So just round the bird there to the end of the wing. The other thing that I would do here, and the reason why I've done this instead of putting it onto the background, is because it's easier to stitch through 2 layers than 3. So while I've got the bird still in one piece, not attached to the background, I'm going to do the little eye with an embroidery stitch as well. So I'll finish stitching this around. Okay, so a couple of things I've done then. Apart from finishing stitching the bird, and I'll put an eye on him in a moment. The other thing is, on the linen, I used my ruler and an erasable pen just to mark a line 1/2 inch from the bottom, and I've sat the bottom part of my branch on there, remembering that's going to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so it will be close to the bottom by the time we put our little bird on there. And he has some feet, it will be balanced in there then. Before I'm going to stitch the bird on and the branch on, when I did glue baste that one on, but I have left the end loose, and once again I still haven't decided what to do with those petals. This one, you'll notice I had the branch going over the top, and I really quite liked that because it almost looks like there's a little you know, centre to the flowers. But I'll try a few different things and decide before I've finished. So with your bird then, I'm just going to put an eye in it, and I use a French knot to do that. So I've chosen to use the green colour, thinking that that might you know, stand out nicely. So again, once again, I've got a knot on the bottom. I know some people don't like knots. I've always used knots, so that's what I'm used to, and that's what I find easiest to use. So holding this thread in my fingers taut, then I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle, and I'll wrap it around a couple of times, twice, and holding that out flat, I'm going to pop that back next to where it came up and pull it through, and I've got a little eye. Once around the needle probably would have done, but I wanted to make sure that you could see it on there. And he will sit there with his little eye on. It's just much easier, I find, to do those things before you've got it and going through all three thicknesses. So I'll just tie that off on the bottom, and I'll just make a little stitch a bit further away from my knot so it doesn't pull loose, and go through that thread again so that we'll tie it off with a knot. So the rest of the process then is just using the same blind applique stitch to stitch the branch and make a decision, of course, on those little flower petals that I've got on the end. Stitch around the rest of the bird, just the outside edge. So when I'm ready, I'll pop some glue under that. As I stitch around the tail, I would normally start stitching on the side that's opposite to where my tail is sticking out. I find if I start stitching here and then come back round to that tail, it's easier to tuck it in underneath just to finish off, and I tend just to use my fingernail to do that, but you might find it easy to use the side of your needle, but you'll get that tucked in nicely. Put a couple of extra stitches on the point so it doesn't come undone. So I'll get that much done, the stitching, and by the time I come back I'll have made a decision about what to do with those petals. So I finished stitching this on then with my blind applique stitch. You'll remember that we left a 1/2 inch, we ruled a line with the air erasable pen, 1/2 inch, and sat that branch along there for the seam allowance, and I did the same at the top and on this side as well to make sure that everything was kept within the seam allowances. All stitched down with the blind applique stitch, and you'll notice that I did put my little flower petals underneath the branch. Once I did that, then I popped the Stitchery stabilizer on the back. Again, if you've got a kit, the stabilizer is in your pack, and it does what it's designed to do, keeps your fabric stable while you stitch. The other thing it does is hides your knots underneath, so if you're a knotter like me or you're travelling with your thread, the Stitchery stabilizer will hold that. Even though we've got a light fabric, you won't be able to see those things behind it. I've used just 2 strands of thread for all the embroidery. A little beak, I've done a satin stitch. The round the outside of the edge of everything is just a running stitch, and I've got a little back stitch there for his legs. In your kit then you'll find some the rest of the fabric that you'll need to make this project, which has been pre-cut for you. The your centre block is 4 inches by 5 inches, so the border strips have been cut the same way. So the 2 shorter ones are for the top and the bottom. Now keep in mind that this is a directional print, so make sure you've got it going round up the right way. And what we're going to be doing, just got it facing the right way, is we'll pop the top and the bottom one down over the top of our centre block, and we're going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So either mark that on your sewing machine or just measure it, and again your disappearing or your erasable pen is handy if you just would prefer to rule a line for that. But we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from each seam allowance down the length of them, and then we'll press them. So with your iron, we'll give them a press on this side first, and then we'll fold it over and we'll press again on both sides. Once that's done, then let's assume that they've been stitched and then nicely pressed open. That's when we'll put the longer ones on the outside edge in the same way. So just double check that you're happy the way the fabric's going, and stitch the length of it then, and that will be perfect length for you, and then fold them open and press again. Okay, so I'm here with now both the top and the bottom borders on and the outside borders on. As I was pressing them, I realised I hadn't actually explained pressing. You should be all familiar with an iron, and maybe you iron a shirt or a skirt, or heaven help us, hubby's shirt from time to time. But we're not actually ironing, even though we're using an iron. All we're doing is pressing, and that's really important to remember the difference. Just press with the iron, because if we start doing this with our iron, we're going to be pushing our seams out of alignment. So just press. You'll set the seam by pressing it on the wrong side first, and then open it up, and that will enable it to lay out flat. If at all you find that it's a little bit wonky or not quite lined up, now is a really good time to grab your ruler and your cutter and just make sure it's even on all sides. I have given you enough fabric that you don't need to trim, but it's more important that you're happy that it's the sides are even, that it's and later on, if we need to, we can adjust the lining fabric to make sure that everything will fit together nicely, but just keep that in mind. The next one's in exactly the same way. So the outside borders, you'll have 2 short ones and 2 long ones. Put the shorter ones on first to the top and the bottom, press, and then press over. The thing that I didn't mention, that's another little tip that I picked up. I normally just have white or cream thread in my sewing machine. Because this fabric is so much darker, I've changed the top thread to be the same colour as the top fabric that I was using, and it's still got the cream underneath. I'll flick them back to the now, but all that does is helps to make that stitching less visible. I also drop my stitching down to a 2. So I've got all my borders on then, and I've got it squared up so the sides are all even. If you do find at any point that you do need to square things up, and it happens easily enough, but if you have, particularly if you have trimmed up this outside, the inside border, the dark one, and then you'll find that the strips that I've given you for the second border are a little bit too long. It's rather than just sewing them on and chopping them off at the end, it is really important that you measure up your piece first. So if we're going to put this one on, measure up the distance from here to here, and then cut that border the same size as this distance first. If you don't do that, if you just sew it on and then chop a piece off afterwards, you're going to find that it will bow out and then you'll have to trim it off again. I have given you a little bit extra fabric just in case you know, you don't need to do any trimming. So we've got that straight on all four sides now. The other fabric that you'll find in your kit is a single piece, which will be, it's designed to be the same size as the front, and that's going to be for your back. And you'll also find two shorter pieces. If we put them on there, you'll see that they're not quite as tall as the pieces that we've used there, and that's because we've got an extra couple of strips that we're going to attach to the top. So the next step then is to put these two strips, one on each pieces of your lining fabric. Once again, 1/4 inch seam, right sides together, and then press it. We'll press it so the seam is pointing upwards. Just this fabric is also a bit directional. You will have to look closely and you can see, so have it going right way up before you start stitching. So you've finished adding on your border strips to the lining. You've got two of those, and your backing, your back fabric for the back of your drawstring bag, and your front. Make sure they're all in the same size. They'll all be the same size. Trim them if necessary. What we're going to do then is make the corners for the boxed corners, and oh, it's a bit hasty, I'm sorry, but what we're wanting to do is to find this point where at the outside edge of that inside border. So we'll use our ruler and we'll just mark a line so that the corner of the ruler is touching that inside border, and then we'll cut that out, and you can cut that out on all four pieces. The next step then is to join these four pieces together, and we're going to start by taking the front and the back, and we're going to join them together on the let's say, call it the short side, so the side where our box corners are. So with right sides together, we will join those together, once again with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we'll press it, but this time I'm going to press that seam open. So we've got the bottom seam joined together there, and I've pressed it open. The other seams, see, I've pressed them together to one side. This one gets pressed open, and it just makes it easier when we do the corners to have those seams open. The other thing I should have mentioned is when particularly with these seams that are next to the openings, make sure you do a reverse stitch or a lock stitch on each end to prevent them coming undone, because they're getting pulled around a little bit. They do have a tendency to unravel sometimes. So we've got our outside pieces joined together, and we're going to join on the lining sections. Now, the easy way to remember this is, you know, long edge to long edge. So we'll put one lining section to the top and one lining section to the back, and once again with our 1/4 inch seam allowance we'll join those together. So the only side at this point that doesn't get joined together is the bottom one for the moment. I've got all 4 pieces joined together now. Then the lining on the outside, the front and the back together on the in the inside pieces there. So the next step then is to join it up at the side seams, but a couple of things that we need to keep in mind before we do that. First one is that we're going to need an opening to turn it the right side out, and I tend to like to keep my opening in the side of the lining section, and we're looking at you know, sort of 3 inches, maybe a bit less than that if we can. So we need to try and keep it away from those corners. So I'm going to just mark a lining, maybe 3 inches max. I'll try and squeeze it into 2.5 and just mark it there. So when I sew up the side seams, I need to leave just on one side a section that I can use to turn it right side out. The other place where we're going to need to leave an opening is where we're going to put the casing through, and in this one I'd like to put it just above the inside border, or that dark red one. And so I'm going to mark that. If I line up my ruler here, you'll see got this number there, 8, sitting on top of my seam allowance where that inside border is. So I'm going to take that over to the margin there, to the outside edge, and I'm going to put a line there, and I want my opening just to be 3/4 of an inch. So we'll measure that one there. So that's a section that I'm going to need to leave opening for my open for my cord. And I'll do the same thing on this side. Just bring it over so it's in line with the top of that seam allowance. And I'll put my 3/4 of an inch mark there. So I'm going to sew up the side seams now then, and this on this side it will be starting at the boxed corner with a double stitch, or a lock stitch, reverse stitch, coming all the way up through then to this first line of the casing, and then again a lock stitch, then start again at the next line with a lock stitch, and then down to the bottom. So I'm going to need to make sure I've got all my seams lined up. So in this case it will be where that band is on the top of the lining, and I'll put pins through those to make sure that they are lined up, so that when I sew them my seams will be in alignment on both sides, and those marks will remind me that I have to not only leave the casing open on that side, but I also need to leave my opening. I know I've still got this side open, and it's just a little bit easier to keep that one open until a little bit later, because we're going to be doing a little bit more on the other side to make that tunnel for the casing. It's easier to do that while that's open. Once I've got those seams done, then I'm going to press those side seams open, because once again it makes it a bit easier to line up our corners. So with my side seams sewn up then, except for those openings that we left in, I've still got my bottom edge open, and I do find it was easier to press those seams flat with that bottom edge open, but we better not forget to close it up sometime soon. So turn it right sides out then, and you should have managed to get your seams nicely lined up if you've lined them up before you sew them. Don't forget the little strip goes on top of the lining, goes to the inside, and then I just give it a press just around the top edge to make it sit nicely for you. Before we go too much further though, we will put in the casing line. Alright, so just remembering then, having just drawn it in the wrong place, remembering, and you can check where you left your opening to double check. So we'll mark our line 1/4 inch long from that seam line. And we just needed it to be 3/4 of an inch wide. So I've sewn my casing around there then, and those lines that I'd ruled with the air erasable pen will disappear in a couple of hours. Now I have a free arm on my sewing machine, which means it's got a little table on it that you can simply pull away. Gives you quite a narrow neck that you can slip this over and stitch around the outside edge. If your sewing machine won't let you do that, you can turn your bag inside out and simply put it under the sewing machine this way so that you can top stitch and see where you're actually stitching. Just simply going around that way, you'll find it a lot easier than trying to do it from the wrong side. So whichever way works for you, you'll be able to get that casing on there. The next thing then to do are the boxed corners. So we'll turn it wrong side out again, which is still a little bit easier because we've got that nice big opening at the bottom, but now comes the time that we're going to have to close it up. So we will stitch along the bottom edge, but when I go to do that at the same time, I'm going to be making these boxed corners. So you'll recall that we had when we press those seams, we press them flat, and this is where it makes it a lot easier to line those up. So once again, we're matching our seam lines, and I'll pop a pin on the seam line so that when I sew, I won't be sewing over the pin, but those two seams will be matched, and they should, if I've got them lined up perfectly, they should come out looking like that when I've finished. So with 1/4 inch seam again, then we're just going to stitch from one side to the other. So did you see, just to reiterate what I did, the corners were looking like that, and I simply pulled them apart. Once again, lock at the beginning and end of the seam, but 1/4 inch seam allowance across from one side to the other. So once you've joined up your bottom edge, you'll do the same on all 4 corners, and then we'll have to turn it right side out through the opening that we left in the side. So once you've finished sewing your 4 corners and you've turned it the right side out, the only thing left to do then is your cord. If you've got a kit, you'll have one long length of cord. Cut it in half and just attach a safety pin, or you might have something else to thread it through. So with one piece of cord, you're going to put it through the opening and thread it all the way round so it comes back out the same hole that you put it into. And then with the clips, you'll just thread the 2 ends through the little clip. You'll have to push it up if you've got this little white one, or you might have a black one, but at some point you'll need to push something so you can get the cord to go through, and then you'll tie a knot. And then you'll do the same thing with the other side. After that, it's just sewing up the opening, and you might like to do that by hand with a ladder stitch, or run down there nice and close to the edge on your sewing machine. I hope that you've enjoyed that and found it helpful. As I mentioned before, we've got the kits available, at least in those 2 colours. If you wanted to follow along and grab a kit from our store, everything's included except for the glue pen, but we do have those available for sale as well if you wanted to, or if you needed a glue pen or refills to include them in your order. If you've enjoyed that, please just like and subscribe our videos, and then you'll be notified when we have some more. Otherwise, I hope to see you around somewhere at a craft fair, or send me a message. Send us a photo of things that you've made. We'd love to see, particularly if you've made something from one of our kits. I'd like to see your take on it. Until next time, we'll see you again soon. Cheers.